So, yes, good morning, and thank you very much that you show up that early in the morning for the early bird discussion. Many of you, I remember, also were here until really late evening. Yesterday we had an interesting discussion at the last session on the sanctions, which is a topic which may lead in discussions to confrontation. This morning we have a topic which definitely is good for cooperation. And the next 45 minutes we want to focus on this. Our topic this morning is the common economic space from Lisbon to Vladivostok. And then it says here in the program, a fantasy or a future reality. So we certainly hope for the later. When I say we, my name is Ulf Schneider. I'm initiator and co-chairman of the working group of about 10 business associations and more than 10 corporates who initiated a working group to work out a concept and a concrete plan how to start with a common economic space from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Who is interested to talk about taking part in this working group can contact me after our discussion. I have 5 people with me, all experts in this area, and together with them we want to manage the next 45 minutes. We have Tony van der Togt, senior research fellow from the Netherlands, International Relations Institute of the Netherlands. We have next to him Kamil Glesinski, who comes from Poland, of the Center of Eastern Studies, a senior fellow. We have Alexandra Dienz, research associate with the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung, one of the strong supporters of this conference also. We have Sergei Shukhno, director of the Department for Integration Development of the Eurasian Economic Commission. And we have with us Dr. Bernhard Thies, the president of the European Committee for Electrotechnical Standardization, in short, CENELEC. Thank you very much to all 5 of you that you first agreed to come to here, to Minsk, and secondly also for this early morning session. As I said, we have only 45 minutes in total. We would like to use them as much as possible. And I would like to give the first word for an introductory statement. I ask everybody to make it rather short, to Tony, who is in this topic for quite some time on the common economic space. And Tony, would like to ask you to describe a little bit your vision, and maybe also on this subtitle that we have, fantasy or future reality, and what can be done, what benefits it may bring, what maybe also problems it may bring that have to be solved, what can be concrete steps. The floor is yours, Tony.
Well, thank you very much. We have been looking at this for some time now, did some studies, well, I must say that over the last few years I haven't become more optimistic, but pragmatically looking at this I can still see some small steps forward. I think at the moment everything is very much influenced by the present political conditions, which also makes it uncertain how far the European Commission could go to reaching out to the Eurasian Economic Commission and starting, let's say, more formal work together, especially on approximation of norms and standards, which is useful for basically for everyone. I have seen, let's say, in Russian academia and colleagues working in Russian think tanks, somewhat of a declining interest in, let's say, greater Europe, because they are shifting more now towards new ideas of a greater Eurasia. And that has fundamental consequences also when we are discussing things like a future broader free trade agreement between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union if political circumstances would allow. Also, this idea of a broader free trade area, a lot of work has already been done, especially by the International Institute of Applied Systems Analysis. And I'm quite happy to see Michael Emerson here, who is one of the real experts participating. I think next week you will have your next conference in Moscow. And they've been working out on, well, technical aspects, certain areas which are not covered yet completely by the Eurasian Economic Union, and where it is more easy to move forward. Because, well, the Eurasian Economic Union now is developed into a customs union, a common customs code, but there are still a lot of other areas not covered by obligations of Eurasian Economic Union. You can see that also from the recent agreement between the European Union and Armenia, where, well, part of Armenia's obligations are now, well, under the, as member of the Eurasian Economic Union, but there are a number of other areas which are where the EU and Armenia can push ahead. Well, and this covers also areas partly like transport and infrastructure, energy. The Eurasian Economic Union wants to move ahead in those spheres, but it is still something for the future. So it means that those are areas we could also focus on and work more in cooperation with partners, not only Russian partners, not only Eurasian Economic Union as an institute, but also from individual member states, especially, well, Belarus, Kazakhstan. As I already said, the most important challenge now for, in fact, both the Eurasian Economic Union, which in my view is now growing a bit more protectionist than I had hoped for, because the more open it would be to free trade, to real free trade agreements, the best it would be also for our trade relations. But the big game changer now is China, is the Belt and Road Initiative. And here, this is a challenge for both of us. You know probably that, well, today Bundeskanzler Merkel is in Beijing. Since, well, Europeans are divided how to approach China on this. And there are some problems, of course, with reciprocity, what the ideas the Chinese have in mind about programs like this. It is not always a level playing field for our companies. It is very often accompanied by Chinese loans, which eventually will have to be paid back. And like for countries in Belarus, it's a challenge. Well, Chinese coming with Chinese labor force. There's Chinese loans. And both in, let's say, the Eastern Partnership of the European Union, but also in the Balkans, also individual member states of the Eurasian Economic Union, this is a growing challenge, how to tackle this. So one of our recommendations has been, well, we should, at a certain stage, start talking as European Union with the Chinese about this. Because Belt and Road Initiative is very broad, but for this area it covers mainly transport and infrastructure, and there are all kind of other spheres which are not covered by it, like digitalization. And so there is a lot we could do either together with the Eurasian Economic Union, and I think that should already start now, but also in contacts with Chinese partners, especially if we want to move further in the direction not only of this greater Europe, but what now in Russia is also, let's say, a much more important topic than it ever was, which is a greater Eurasia. So then we are discussing not only from Lisbon to Vladivostok, but then we are discussing from Lisbon to Shanghai. So that is, I think, the game changer, and it's challenging both the Eurasian Economic Union. They've recently signed an agreement with China, but the cooperation which is envisaged there is actually quite limited, and it is by far not a preferential free trade agreement or anything like it. So it's a challenge for them, and it's at the same time a challenge for us. So I think also on the business level and on the level of researchers, we should try and get together there and work out something in practical terms.
Yes, Tony, thank you very much. I took quite a lot of notes, but the discussion will be later. Kamil Klesinski, Poland has, at least I perceive it from in politics, a very specific view on cooperation with the Eurasian Economic Union, in particular with one of the members, the biggest one, with Russia. We are quite interested to listen to your perspective. Poland would be a country that probably benefits in terms of trade quite a lot if we have such an agreement from Lisbon to Vladivostok. But how does Poland, how does politics, but also how does business in Poland, how does society look at such ideas? What could be ideas from Polish side to get involved into such a project? The floor is yours, Kamil.
Thank you very much. I was asked to present Polish view. It will be my view as an analyst of Center for Eastern Studies, but as I promised Schneider Group, it will be also a typical Polish view. I'm not so original, unique in my perspective in Polish terms. There is a more or less common view in Poland among experts and politicians on Eurasian Economic Union. This view is rather skeptical, softly speaking. Maybe I will explain why, at least for two reasons. First of all, despite official declarations and official goal of this structure, international structure, this is first of all a political project from our point of view. Political Russian project, what is very important, aimed at restoration, at reconstruction of a zone of influence on post-Soviet space, at least on a part of post-Soviet space. Of course, Ukraine and other countries are not interested and are excluded due to many reasons from this project. But as part of it, Russia is trying to do it. Unlike to European Union, this is a very big difference, a very important difference, because when the European Union appeared before being European Union as a common space of economy, it was first of all to prevent another war. It was based on experience of Second World War, and it wasn't any attempt to build zone of influence only one of states which created that. It was more or less equal and based on common values. Here we have completely different situation. Economic integration, which is fundamental, which should be fundamental for this structure, is only instrument used by Russia as the biggest and the strongest state in this structure to force or to attract other states to be in this structure and to involve in further integration. Russia, of course, uses, it's obvious, but I only will mention, we uses such instruments as energy resources, as suppliers of energy resources, which is very visible, of course, in Belarus. Maybe not so much in case of Kazakhstan, of course. Uses access to market, to still very promising and very attractive Russian market, internal market for export, and other things as loans, as other forms of subsidies and cooperation. This is a contradiction to Polish strategy on post-Soviet space. We still see and will see this space as a group of independent states. Belarus for us also is and should be independent states, independent neighbors, which is not which shouldn't be under threat of losing its independence, also due to such a project. Second factor, second reason which convinces us that this project is not attractive and not promising for us from our point of view, is also let's say analytical reason, I would say, not political. First was connected to our strategy of policy, of our external policy, foreign policy on post-Soviet space, and second reason is based on analytical estimation. Even if we resign from our plan that we should keep in relations with independent states and and support independence of Ukraine, Belarus, I don't know, Russia, if Russia needs our support, but I mean first of all Belarus in this case. Even if we resign from this strategy, when we observe work of Eurasian Economic Union, we should admit that it's something completely different from European Union. Generally speaking, it's very difficult to unite countries, authoritarian countries, with strong leaders who are used to use personal contacts in solving major problems, untransparent ways, untransparent standards, also in economy. It also is the result of this approach is lack of transparency and lack of common rules, transparent schemes in cooperation between those countries. We have many examples of that. For example, very current issue, discussion about dairy products, Russian dairy products, and their access to the Russian market. We see that the Eurasian Commission is helpless. Is helpless in this issue. Is even not involved in a way as it deserves as a structure. Mostly it goes between governments, between presidents of those two countries, or lower level. We see that Eurasian Commission plays secondary role in this issue, and that's even the last example of that. We also should admit that despite all declarations, we still don't have a common market of main goods, main goods on this space. I mean, electricity, oil, and gas. Even if we look at this schedule, which is now on the table, we should doubt that it will be fulfilled in the future. For example, Belarusian side, Belarusian authorities still claim, and I suppose that they have some arguments on that, that even in 2025, as it's planned, it's doubtful to create a common market of oil and gas. For Belarus, it's crucial. Without this common market, presence of Belarus in Eurasian Economic Union is more theoretical than practical, to be honest. Maybe at the end, I would show some data. When we look on data of trade between countries of Eurasian Economic Union from first 10 months from 2017, we will see big difference, huge difference between internal trade among members of Eurasian Economic Union and external trade of Eurasian Economic Union. Internal trade was at more than $40 billion, and external trade was $500 billion. Of course, the difference is obvious. It should be, because main partners are outside. But size of this difference, I think, tells us much more than other arguments. Basing on that,
Kamil, we have to come to
the final
1 minute.
Final conclusion. Basing on that, we think that in short term and mid term, Eurasian Economic Union won't be partner for us, more important than governments of several countries, than Belarusian government, Russian government, Kazakh government, and other governments of member states of Eurasian Union. Of course, in long term, we shouldn't exclude this perspective of common space from Lisbon to Vladivostok, but so far, due to reasons which I mentioned, we don't think that this is promising perspective and realistic perspective. When, for example, our investors, Polish investors from Minsk, promise that if you invest to Belarus, you will be you will have full access to our common market. It means Russian market, Kazakh market. It's regarded in a very skeptical way. So thank you very much.
Okay, Kamil, thank you very much. Quite hard words, partially, that can give good reason for discussion. That is good. Alexandra, I ask you for a little bit patience because I would like to give you the role to comment a little bit on all of us, and would like to give the word to Dr. Bernhard Thies. Technical regulations, first of all, sounds more boring, but is the most important part, I think, for a concrete start of cooperation between the European Union and the Eurasian Economic Union. And so far, I think it plays an extremely important role. And the association, the committee, Bernhard Thies is the president of, for electrotechnical standardization, signed a memorandum of understanding with the Eurasian Economic Commission. We are very curious, Bernhard, to listen to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. No, it's off. Yeah, thank you very much for the nice introduction. It's an honor for me and a pleasure for me to be here to talk about a little bit about the technical regulation and standardization and the importance of that. Let me say only a few words of the European standardization system. The actors in the systems are European Commission as a regulator, CENELEC, CEN and ETSI as the standardization organizations, and there is a philosophy behind. The philosophy means that there is a trust between the European Commission on one side and the standardization organization on the other side. So that means that the European Commission is making the directives, they are writing in the essential requirements, and then gives a trust to the technical expert in our association to concrete it in technical standards. And we are working then for removing all the technical barriers of trade in Europe. But the standards must be international standards, and therefore we have a cooperation agreement with the IEC. 80% of the electrotechnical standards are international standards. And our aim is, of course, to bring this standardization system, it's unique in the world, and I think it's the best one in the world, also to other regions in the world. And therefore, that was the intention to make the cooperation with the EEC to find out a way, coordination in the technical regulation, and they did a lot of things to have similar systems as we had at European level. It's not a directive, it's called a regulation, but the content of that, and also a little bit the philosophy behind that, it's nearly the same. And then we have made the cooperation to find out a way in a lot of technical areas to cooperate in standards, and also to understand why there are some deviations in that area compared to the European one, and what we can do to go down with these numbers of variations in that standard. And then we are working on an action plan and of course on a roadmap in all the areas, especially is in the toys area, but in the electrotechnical area we're working on. And the newest one, of course, is Industry 4.0. That means the digitalization of the whole industry is one part of that. And then we believe that coming into detailed discussion with the EAC, we will find out a way that at the end, the technical regulation between EAC and EU is nearly the same. And then it's very simple also for us to make the standards in the same way. And this standard should international standards, because the companies which are working in Belarus, they should send their products to the whole world, not only to the European world, with the same standards. And that is the main issue and also the main work together with CENELEC and CEN and with the Eurasian Economical Commission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think it shows very concrete examples how one can move ahead on a non-political level, what looks to me like the most promising idea at the moment, to focus really on concrete examples that bring business people ahead from Lisbon to Vladivostok. Those who do not understand Russian should take their headphones now. I give the floor to Sergej Shukhno. Sergej Shukhno является директором департамента интеграции в Евразийской экономической комиссии. И, Сергей, нам, конечно, очень интересно ваше видение по поводу единого экономического пространства от Владивостока до Лиссабона, и особенно как Евразийский экономический союз и Европейский союз, как они совместно могут начинать такую идею. И какие конкретные идеи от вашей стороны, от стороны Евразийской комиссии, есть на более подробное сотрудничество с Европейским Союзом. И, конечно, тоже нам очень интересно ваше комментирование после презентации уже трех докладчиков. Сергей, the floor is yours.
Спасибо, уважаемый Ульф. Для меня тоже большая честь выступить здесь на таком представительном форуме. Я внимательно выслушал наших докладчиков и еще раз убеждаюсь в том, что может сделать идею единого экономического пространства от Лиссабона до Владивостока более реалистичной. Но для меня ответ на этот вопрос прост, логичен. Это активизация процессов экономической интеграции на нашем континенте. И в первую очередь я убежден в том, что диалог между двумя ключевыми интеграционными объединениями, Евразийский Союз и Европейский Союз, это как раз то, что способно перевести разговор из плоскости научных и экспертных прогнозов в практическую плоскость. По сути, речь идет о диалоге двух объединений, которые находятся на относительно сопоставимом уровне интеграции и используют для своего развития одинаковые принципы. Конечно, с определенной региональной спецификой, но государства-члены ставят перед собой схожие цели. И в таких условиях отсутствие постоянного диалога представляется уже неестественным. Два наших центра не могут находиться в изоляции друг от друга и не вести, как минимум, непрерывного технического диалога. Я очень благодарен господину Тису за то, что он высказался по началу диалога по вопросам технического регулирования. А упущенные возможности, они могут привести, конечно, к определенным потерям. Сегодня уважаемый Камиль Клысинский называл цифры, я, конечно, могу их уточнить, несколько эти цифры по внутренней торговле Евразийского Союза. Хочу отметить, что самый большой рывок во внутренней торговле Евразийского экономического союза состоялся в 2010-2012 году, когда мы создали таможенный союз, и внутренняя торговля возросла более чем в 2 раза. Потом случился кризис общий, мы пошли вниз, но по итогам 2017 года внутренняя торговля возросла на 27%. Внешняя тоже в сопоставимых цифрах на 26%. Поэтому эти тенденции позитивные. Но я хотел бы сказать о других цифрах. О том, что тут и санкции здесь включаются в этот механизм. Сейчас Европа проигрывает в торговле с Евразийским Союзом странам АТЭС. Мы уже 2-й год наблюдаем тенденцию увеличения импорта из стран Азиатско-Тихоокеанского региона в Евразийский Союз по сравнению с импортом из Европейского Союза. Но, конечно, в результате экспортеры европейские терпят убытки, а на Востоке платежеспособные партнеры, я хочу это подчеркнуть, недополучают инвестиции и технологии. Второй аспект – это, конечно, увеличивает расхождение в регуляторике торговли, отсутствие диалога. И Хотя вот об активном сближении сейчас я согласен с этим, да, на треке Европейский Союз, Евразийский Союз. В современной политической, экономической ситуации говорить очень сложно, но этот диалог возможен, и более того, он необходим. Потому что мы чувствуем в этом запрос и европейских деловых кругов на восстановление хозяйственных связей и установление прямых контактов между двумя союзами. Что же даст этот диалог? Во-первых, восстановление как минимум на докризисном уровне объемов торговли и инвестиций. Во-вторых, это начало взаимодействия, вот в первую очередь в тех сферах, где Евразийский союз обладает наднациональными полномочиями. Он узкий, этот спектр, но он есть. Это техническое регулирование, это таможенное администрирование, это применение санитарных, ветеринарных мер и различные аспекты торговой политики. И проблемы в этих перечисленных областях, они уже давно перезрели и требуют скорейшего разрешения. И именно они, эти вопросы, были в центре внимания в ходе первого визита представителей Европейской комиссии в Евразийскую экономическую комиссию, состоявшемся осенью 2017 года. В-третьих, будут созданы предпосылки для выработки совместных подходов к современным вызовам экономического развития. В первую очередь связанных с четвертой индустриальной революцией, цифровой трансформацией и появлением новых, отмиранием привычных отраслей промышленности. И объединение усилий, здесь я абсолютно согласен с господином Колесинским, объединение усилий особенно актуально на фоне запуска инициированного Китаем проекта «Один путь, один пояс, один путь». Здесь, конечно, и возможность реализации совместных инфраструктурных проектов, тем более ранее такой опыт уже был. И, конечно, безусловно, диалог будет влиять на состояние безопасности на Евразийском континенте. Это основная тема Минского диалога, которую мы здесь уже обсуждаем третий день. Диалог двух союзов и прогресс создания единого экономического пространства на континенте имеет очень важные эффекты не только для государств-членов этих объединений. Выгоды от этого могут ощутить и страны, которые не входят ни в одну из них, поскольку вопрос выбора, к какому союзу присоединиться, может сам собой отойти на второй план и не будет таким острым. Вот это мой комментарий. Спасибо.
Сергей, спасибо большое. The Eurasian Economic Commission and its chairman, Mr. Saxian, gave a quite interesting interview, actually, which was published in this journal East Contact. If you're interested, you find this over there at the entrance. Another very interesting publication you also find at the entrance is this one word, engage. And Alexandra Nines will briefly, I think, describe what is the content of this. And Alexandra, the floor is yours, and I would be very happy if you comment a little bit on what you just heard from all of us.
Sure,
and that should be then the introduction to the discussion with all of you.
Yeah, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to have a twofold opportunity here on this panel, not only to slightly increase or improve the gender balance, but also to comment on this indeed controversial issue of the integration with a big question mark between the Eurasian Economic Union and the European Union. And here I would like to share with you my stance, which is very optimistic, in a way out of necessity. So we believe at the Regional Office for Cooperation and Peace in Europe, where I work, that given the current tensions between, let me say broadly, Russia and the West, and the states in between which suffer under this confrontation, there's simply currently no other feasible way to go than to try those small steps of rapprochement in the economic direction. I would like to structure my comments along the most common critical observations or critical points about the Eurasian Economic Union, and we heard some of them here from the panel already. So one of them, and it seems to me the most kind of grave one, is that we don't want to work with the Eurasian Economic Union or Commission because it's all about Russia and Russian imperial ambitions in the region, etc. Quite to the contrary, I think one could argue that the Eurasian Economic Union as a multilateral structure, as an international organization, provides an opportunity rather to engage Russia. This refers to this title of my report, to engage Russia as part of a multilateral institution, rather than simply dealing with Russia bilaterally, and we know this relation is marred with problems, and by the way, there's a big chance of perhaps losing out of sight the interests of those smaller countries which are also members of the Eurasian Economic Union, like Kazakhstan, like Belarus, like Armenia, Kyrgyzstan for that matter, of course, too. Another very commonly heard argument, and in fact this is the dominant discourse from Brussels, and I had a few controversial discussions in Brussels on the issue of connectivity between the EU and the Eurasian Economic Union. The EU seems to prefer, strangely enough, bilateral relations to multilateral ones, even though the whole European Union project is actually about multilateralism and about trade agreements. So what we would often hear is that the European Union prefers relations with members of the Eurasian Economic Union, not the Eurasian Economic Union as a multilateral structure. And I think this is just worth noting critically, that here the EU seems to, in a way, betray, perhaps for political reasons, the very essence of the project that it stands for. So clearly, I would argue for engaging here with the region on a multilateral level through the Eurasian Economic Union, rather than simply bilaterally. Also, we hear often that the European Commission doesn't have a mandate for starting talks with the Eurasian Economic Union or Eurasian Economic Commission, which is simply not true, because the European Commission has, from the very beginning of its existence, had a mandate of free trade talks with the whole world. So here it's again a very politicized issue, rather than seeing talks with the Eurasian Economic Commission on a technocratic, on a technical level. This issue is being very politicized, and perhaps it's worth depoliticizing it again and start talking about technical issues like standards, like customs procedures, etc. Finally, a very common and indeed serious counter-argument against engagement with the Eurasian Economic Union is that currently we have sanctions, we have the unresolved Ukraine crisis, so why should we talk at all before this mess is solved? And again, here I think the argument should be right the other way around, precisely because we have a deep conflict with Russia and between Russia and the West. We should explore those few avenues which still remain open for cooperation. And this is perhaps a small step approach, if you will, that we identify areas of common interest, and I think economic development and trade is definitely an area of common interest, and start working out common procedures, again, common standards on how we can engage in this area, in parallel to, of course, solving such important political crisis, and indeed grave militarily crisis like the Ukraine crisis. So once the Minsk agreements are fulfilled, let me be that optimistic, we would have already some common understanding of how we want to proceed in economic cooperation. These arguments I'm making from the perspective of the in-between countries. So it's not only about engaging Russia, but it's about thinking of, again, those smaller countries which seem to be caught in this kind of either-or choice between the two integration blocks. And in fact, if we look at trade patterns of countries between the EU and Russia, they're pretty much 50-50, trading both with East and West. And in fact, it's very true of Ukraine. Prior to the crisis, it was trading with Russia and with the EU pretty much on a 50-50 basis. So I would argue that the in-between countries suffer from the current confrontation and conflict between Russia and the West, by the way, the conflict that they are not responsible for. Their trade patterns show that they would have the best chance of prosperity and economic development if they maintained trade relations with both partners to the east and west, and they would be lifted out of this unsustainable status quo in between. Just as a final remark, I think Armenia produces hope for exactly this kind of vision, being a member of the Eurasian Economic Union and at the same time having signed a relatively comprehensive agreement on trade. And the vision, so a kind of a long-term perspective where we want to go, would be, in our opinion, a free trade zone, indeed, between Lisbon and Vladivostok. So I think a common economic space like the OSCE has been envisioning it, for example, in the Astana Declaration back in 2010. This should be very much on our agenda and as our long-term vision. And maybe as a final remark, because we heard China being mentioned multiple times.
Ideally a short remark, because I still would like to give the floor for questions.
It's just basically one sentence for you also to think about. Whom do we want to set standards in larger Eurasia? Is it China or is it perhaps Europe who wants to set standards in this very big economic space? Thank you.
I hope this was a rhetorical question. The answer is clear. Thank you very much, Alexandra. I would like to give the floor to all of you, and I see there are right away a couple of questions. I see 3 at the moment. It's not so easy to see from here, everybody. I propose we collect the questions, and the first one we take right over there, and then I have another 2 here. So I have you on my radar.
Laurynas Jonavičius, Vilnius University, Lithuania. Thank you for your presentations. Historical questions. There have been attempts to engage Russia before. We had 4 common areas. We had Partnership for Modernization. Engagement with Eurasian Economic Union is actually also an attempt to engage Russia. How it is different? We know how it works with common spaces, with Partnership for Modernization. And I wouldn't be so sure that depoliticization of relations would work, having in mind especially a Russian domestic situation where politics and economy always go together. It's almost impossible to put them apart.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to address the question to one person concretely? Okay, good. Then we have a question over there.
I'm Gennady from Georgia. I have 2 short questions. One is to Mr. van der Togt. You mentioned this Belt and Road initiative as a challenge to the agenda of this panel, let's say so. Could you spell out why exactly it is a challenge, what it exactly challenges, and maybe it's if the idea is about, you know, improving relations between East and West, maybe the slogan from Lisbon to Vladivostok should be replaced by slogan from Lisbon to Shanghai or something, and maybe in this tripartite format there is somewhat even better chances to achieve some understanding.
Good.
And second short question.
Very short, please.
I mean, it's to all of you, especially European part of the panel. You addressed these relations between Europe and Eurasia as 2 multilateral projects. So the question is, is Eurasian Economic Union a multilateral project in the same way in which EU is multilateral project, or is it Russia's project, basically, and relations are really between EU and Russia, but just in a little bit different format?
Good. You say you addressed the question to the Europeans. We are all Europeans here. Thank you. And we have one question right here, and then we take the 4th one, and then unfortunately we have to close the floor for the answers. So the next question is right here, first row.
Vladimir Sokor with the Jamestown Foundation in Washington. China's Belt and Road Initiative, the European sanctions, and Russia's turn from a vision of Lisbon to Vladivostok, Greater Europe, to a Greater Eurasia vision, have been mentioned as impediments to Lisbon to Vladivostok. Meanwhile, the Trump administration is mainly responsible for the breakdown in the TTIP talks. And even Hillary Clinton, during the electoral campaign in the United States, was backtracking on the TTIP. So my question to the panel is, does this seems to remove or to counteract the objection that Lisbon to Vladivostok would lead to a split in the Euro-Atlantic community? It's difficult now to make that argument after the Trump administration's actions.
Good, thank you.
So my question to the panel is, does this change in US policy make you feel more optimistic about Lisbon to Vladivostok?
Okay, important question, yeah, thank you very much. And the last one we take is right over there.
Thank you very much. Just one kind of remark probably, because the title of your session just reminded me words of very good Russian Orientalist Golenishev-Kutuzov. He said about one cultural lines from Samarkand to Cordova. So you're talking about Vladivostok and Lisbon. So here we go ahead in order to get back. It's a kind of Sufi philosophy. I wanted to these words just remind me that Golenishev-Kutuzov talked about cultural line. And you was talking about so good, so intensive way about economic and about economical, frontiers. What about cultural studies? What about, again, to intensify cultural dialogue in terms of understand more each other, probably from this line, and it might help us.
Thank you very much. Good question. And my proposal is each of the panelists now has 1 minute. Unfortunately, then we have to stop the discussion because the next panel wants to start. And you pick those questions to answer you feel comfortable with. We just start with Bernhard Thies. And keep it short, 1 minute, please, each of you.
Thank you for this question, from the social part to the economical part to the other parts in the world. We are standardizers. We are also working together with China to find out the best way in the One Belt and Road Initiative. And also in China they have a new standardization law. They changed their system in the direction of the European and the American system. And therefore, if we really find out a way between free trade area on standardization, I only can talk about technical issues on technical barriers to trade, that we have one from Lisbon to Vladivostok, and at the addition we have then the cooperation with China on the One Belt, One Road initiative. That could be, of course, bring something in the US administration to think about other things, not only make bashing on Europe or in Germany, and work on the technical regulation between Europe and US. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Bernhard, Sergei, пожалуйста, 1 минута.
Спасибо. Я бы хотел, надеюсь, что я европеец, тоже хотел бы ответить на вопрос представителя Грузии. Дело в том, что диалог между Россией и Европейским Союзом, его можно вести, конечно, безусловно, но без Евразийского Союза он будет неполным. Евразийский Союз имеет наднациональную компетенцию, и по этой компетенции переговоры можно вести только с Евразийским Союзом. Это вопросы заключения соглашения о зонах свободной торговли, это вопросы тарифного нерегулирования, это вопросы таможенного администрирования, это вопросы технического регулирования санитарных, фитосанитарных мер. Это компетенция наша, и здесь стороны уже не имеют самостоятельности. Спасибо.
Спасибо большое, Sergei. Alexandra.
Yes, thank you. I think the fact that prior engagement with Russia didn't work out is not a reason for us not to try now, because at least I believe that deterrence is not the answer to the troubles we have now in relations with Russia, and we need to find ways to re-engage it if we want to live in peaceful Europe in the medium or hopefully even short-term prospect. How to depoliticize Russia's engagement? I mean, big players are dominant. In any case, it's, I think, true of any other regional integration organization than the Eurasian Economic Union. I think here, again, if we see the glass as half full, Russia is rather hedged, at least to a certain degree, in a multilateral structure of the Eurasian Economic Union. So perhaps this gives us a way of better or easier engagement with Russia rather than bilaterally. And finally, this connects to this question, how multilateral is EEU at all? I think those few aspects which are multilateral, as Mr. Chufnot was saying, indeed not so many competences are perhaps on the supranational level, but the EU in its engagement with the Eurasian Economic Union should encourage precisely those multilateral aspects. It's not a surprise to me that after just a few years the Eurasian Economic Union is not that developed like the European Union, so I don't buy this argument that we don't want to engage with them only because they're not that functional yet. The EU, through its engagement, should, again, encourage exactly those multilateral aspects, I think. Thank you.
Good. Thank you very much, Alexander. Camille.
As you could hear from my presentation, I'm enough skeptical to don't argue with all questions, majority of questions. I can agree with Mr. Laurinavicius. I can agree with Mr. Nodia. I'm rather skeptical regarding American influence, as asked Mr. Sokol. Generally speaking, it's very difficult to cooperate with structure, multilateral structure. I mean, Eurasian Economic Union, which is a very difficult partner because we have very big contradiction between official declarations, official statements, documents, structures which have been established, and practice and practical things. It's very difficult. And when I hear call to engage Russia through multilateral structure, multilateral cooperation, it sounds good. Okay, I can agree. Theoretically, it sounds good, but practically, it's very difficult. In these terms, which I mentioned, it's difficult to fulfill. Thank you.
Camille, thank you very much. And Tony, there was also one question directly addressed to you. The keyword was Lisbon, Shanghai.
Yeah, thank you very much about that one. What is the real challenge from the Belt and Road Initiative? I think basically Alexander already answered that one. If we have a competition in who do we want to set the standards, the EU or the EU and Eurasian Economic Union together, or China, I think the answer is clear. I think that's where the real challenge is. Another point I want to make is this whole idea, this engagement, is this primarily engagement with Russia? In my view, it isn't, or it isn't necessarily. It is primarily engaging with the Eurasian Economic Commission in its own competence, because that's also in our interest, and it's engaging with the Eurasian Economic Union member states. Because yes, it is partly, I think, Eurasian Economic Union, as Russia has envisaged it, is partly a geopolitical project, but the individual Eurasian economic member states have their own interests, and the EU should also look very closely at that. We have the sanctions, yes, but the EU sanctions against Russia are rather targeted, and the states in between are actually suffering more from the Russian counter-sanctions, which are basically in contravention of the obligations in the context of the Eurasian Economic Union. So I think, yes, the EU should focus more on engagement, but engagement with the Commission and engagement with the individual Eurasian Economic Union member states. And then whether this will be develop into a broader engagement with Russia along the lines of what we were doing before with the common economic space, the modernization partnerships, well, that is something for the future. So we may already make some small steps in that direction. But that will depend more on political circumstances. But there is a lot we can do right now, and we should not miss out, I think, that opportunity.
Good, Tony, thank you very much. Engagement, I think, is a very good concluding sentence. Everybody of us, I think, has a chance to also contribute, that all these ideas we discussed, that we bring them ahead. One person among us who very much took this leadership and engaged is Yevgeny Prygaman, who is the organizer of all this event. And I think we are not at the end yet, but I think this, Yevgeny, is really a great conference. Thank you very much for your engagement and for your initiative. And I think this is worth really a very, very big applause that we should give to Yevgeny Prygaman as the organizer.